Okay, I have to do an essay, and it's 3 pages long, as said here. So it's on this book called Oil and Oil on Water, and I have to do a deep dive, and I forgot to read it, and I got a 3 page essay on it. So now we're gonna read the entire book. Am I gonna do it in one sitting? Probably not. I ain't gonna lie to you. Probably not, bro. I'm pretty sleepy. I was playing Overwatch and I wasn't as sleepy, but I don't know. I just got sleepy. Knowing I have to read made me sleepy. All right, here we go. I'm walking down a well-lit path, with incidents neatly labeled and dated. But when I reach halfway, memory lets go of my hand, and a fog raises and covers my faces and places. What the fuck? But when I reach halfway, memory lets go of my hand, and a fog rises and covers the faces and places. I am left clawing about in the dark, lost, and have to make up the obscure moments as I go along. Make up the faces and places, even the emotions. Sometimes, to keep on course, I have to return to more recognizable landmarks, and then, with this safety net under me, I can leap onto less certain terrain. So yes, there was an incident, a fire, an explosion in the barn with the oil drums. The fire flew on the wind from house to house, and in a few minutes half the town was ablaze. Many people died, including John's father. They say he died trying to save my sister Boma, and if it wasn't for him, she'd have died. My father was in prison. He doesn't smoke anymore since that day. My mother returned to her parents' village where she still lives, and my sister burned, and as my sister burned and my family disintegrated, I was in Lagos, listening to lectures, eating dinner in Chinese restaurants, and I didn't hear about the tragedy till I returned home with my journalism certificate. No, I was not a pipeline. It was not a pipeline accident, and I was told the white man, as I wrote in my published piece. As I told the white man, as I wrote in my published piece, but it might easily have been one as in countless other villages. My father is still in prison, Boma, and I still go visit him. And each time he sees her face, he turns away and his hands shake. Recently, she has stopped going. My mother comes from the village once every month to see him. Occasionally, I go with her and I watch them look at each other. Sometimes they have a lot to talk about, and sometimes they just stare at each other in silence. The last time I went with her was over a month ago. I sit away from them, but I can still hear what they're saying. She tells them about her life in the village, the farm, how the harvest did this year has been good. He listens, nodding his head all the time. He stares at her, trying to catch her eye, but she avoids his eyes as she speaks, and she calls to me, Rufus, come here. He has the same name as a dog. Why? What the hell? Why do you stand so far away by the window? The guard pretends to be reading his paper, but he watches us all the time. I remember that the room smelled of the roasted peanuts my mother bought for my father. I remember that the guard had a bald spot. My mother looked thinner, darker. Does the sister have like facial burns or something? What is going on? The fog lifts as suddenly as it descended, and the sun shines brightly again. And once more, I am on sure ground, but I know the fog could return again, get into memory's eyes, blinding it momentarily. After a while, the sky and the water and the dense foliage on the river banks all looked the same. Blue and green, blue, green, misty. Green, chicken. The whole landscape was now a mere trick of light, vaporous and shape-shifting, appearing, disappearing behind the fog. It was early morning, but already he had been in the boat for 2 hours, leaving the sea and heading up tributary. Yeah, I got that shit. Going west. Irikife, Irikife Island, also known as Half Moon Island, because of the distant crescent-shaped coastline, had long since disappeared, swallowed by the distance and the darkness cast by the mist that rose like smoke from the river banks. Mid-river, the water was clear and mobile, but towards the banks it turned brackish and still, trapped by mangroves in whose branches the mist hung in clumps like cotton balls ahead of us. The mist arched over the water like a bridge, sometimes entering an especially narrow channel in the river. Our light wooden canoe would be so enveloped in the dense gray stuff that we couldn't see each other as we glided silently over the water. I was wet and cold and hungry, and not for the first time I asked myself if going in search of the kidnapped British woman with Zack was wise after all. This was our ninth day on her trail. The other journalists had long since returned to Port Harcourt, and I was sure the whole adventure, or rather misadventure, was now to them nothing but a memory, anecdotal currency to trade for a drink on a lazy day in the press club room. Zack dismissed them with a wave of his hand. And that is the difference between great reporters and average ones. He was no doubt one of the best in his country ever produced, and because of that I respected his opinion. But right then I'd rather settle for food, dry clothes, and shelter over greatness, or opinion for that matter. Tell me, Rufus, my friend, what do you seek? It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. The woman and the professor. I said, what? Not whom. Forget the woman and her kidnappers for a moment. What we really seek is not them, but the greater meaning. Remember, the story is not the final goal. And what is? The meaning of the story. And only a lucky few ever can discover that. But I think you know what instinctively, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Everything will turn out fine. You'll see. Her shirt was wet under the arms and at the back. He was still fighting the sudden fever he had dogged on that had dogged him since we left Port Harcourt, and the more his health had deteriorated, the more he had taken to philosophizing over almost anything. A bat flying overhead, a dead fish on an oil-polluted water, a gathering of rain clouds in the clear sky. But I was glad his mind was so capable of philosophy. The farther we ventured into the forest, the more I found myself turning to him with questions. I had no idea what he meant about the story and its meaning, but perhaps I would find out before this trip was done. Right now, my only hope was that he would continue to hold on till we were back in Port Harcourt on dry land. Ultimately, things didn't turn out as fine as I had hoped, as he promised, especially for him. But then maybe he was talking not about himself, but about me. He might have felt that he drifted past a point in his river that was beyond return. In the boat was a bag of dried fruit and plastic bottled water. All which the old man said were from the priest. Nah, man. Zoc took out his last bottle of whiskey and, with a heavy sigh, opened it and sipped. Isn't it a bit too early? Never too early. Take a sip, Rufus. It'll keep you warm. I pushed away the bottle, almost knocking it out of his weak grip. Can't you wait till we're a bit sure of where we are? We could be lost, you know. We'll be fine. The old man here will take care of us. The old man smiled his big, encouraging smile, nodding his gnomish head eagerly. Beside him, his son was shrouded in the dense smoke produced by the boat's outboard motor. His figure appearing, disappearing with the play of the wind on the mist. The boy looked no more than 10 years old, but he might have been older, his growth stunted by poor diet. His hair was reddish and sparse, his arms were bony like his father's. They were both dressed in the same shapeless and faded homespun shirts and trousers. Their hands looked rough and calloused from seawater. They smelled of fish and seemed as elemental as seaweed. They were wet from water spray coming off the sides of the boat. The boy saw me looking at him and returned my gaze without self-consciousness. His eyes, guileless and full of curiosity, forcing me to turn away. He chugged along into the narrowing river, followed by the motor's droning roar. Do you know where the militants are? No, sir. No, sir. People say them fit. No, sir. People say them fit be near Abakiri. Did I hit that hole? Did I hit that hole? Nah. Let me chill. It was all guesswork. The militants already concealed the locations of their camps because their lives depended on that, and on the ability to pick up their tents and move with the first sign of trouble from the federal patrols that were in constant war with them. Whenever they invited the press to view hostages or to give lengthy interviews about their reason for fighting the government, they did so in a village or on a deserted island far from their camps. What was certain, though, was that they never strayed too far from the pipelines and oil rigs and refineries, which they constantly threatened to blow up, thereby ensuring for themselves a steady livelihood. If the old man was able to take us to an actual camp, and if we were able to come back safely, we would be among the very few reporters who had done so. My instinct told me to get down at the next village and make my way back to Port Harcourt, to forget the white woman because the militants would free her eventually, to forget the perfect story because there was no such thing as a perfect story anyways, and I already had enough paragraphs to make my editor welcome me with open arms, to forget Irikifi Island, where we had been holed up for the past 5 days, where the old man and his son came to get us, but most importantly, to forget Zach and his desperate, long-shot ambitions. Let life continue as it once did, simple, predictable, full of its own myriad concerns. But what journalist doesn't hunger for the perfect story? And this one, as Zach explained, and I totally agreed, was as close to it as any reporter could ever get. The very thought of turning back made me realize how barren, how diminished life would be after the excitement of the past few days. And as we went deeper and deeper up the river, and farther away from sea, I made no move to stop. I felt hope and doubt alternating in my chest. I felt a stirring of some hunger inside of me, something I had never felt before, a conviction, almost that I was meant to be here, on this boat, on this trail. It was like a breeze blowing through some long forgotten section of my mind. I knew Zach could see this stirring hope in my eyes. He could give it a name and describe how irresistible was its pull. Far ahead, appearing suddenly out of the water like a mirage, was a huge cliff with uneven steps cut into the rock face, leading up to a dense thicket of trees that marked the beginning of the village. We left the boat, climbed up the tricky stone steps, stopping often to catch our breath. Who lives here? The old man shrugged. Nobody. Where did the people go? Them left because of too much fighting. The village looked as if a deadly epidemic had swept through it. A square concrete platform dominated the village center like some sacrificial altar. Abandoned oil drilling paraphernalia were strewn around the platform. Some appeared to be sprouting out of the widening cracks of the concrete alongside thick clumps of grass. High up in the rusty rigging, wasps flew in and out of their nests. A weather-beaten signboard near the platform said Oil Well Number 2, 1999, 1,500 meters. The houses began not too far away from the derelict platform. We went from one squat brick structure to the next, from compound to compound, but they were all empty, with wide open windows, a school on broken hinges, while overhead the roofs had big holes in which strong sunlight fell. Behind one of the houses we found a chicken pen with about 10 chickens inside, all dead and decomposing, the maggots trafficking beneath their feathers. We covered our noses and moved on to the next compound, but it wasn't much different. Kunky pots stood up and empty on cold hearths. Next to them stood water pots filled with water on whose surface mosquito larvae quickly flourished. It took less than an hour to traverse the little village, going from one deserted household to the next. talking pictures, hoping to meet perhaps one accidental strangler, one survivor, one voice to interview. We left. Zach looked at Zach looked as if he were about to throw up. His face was sweaty, and he raised the bottle to his lips many times before the alertness returned to his eyes. We often stopped to rest, and the river grew narrower each time we set out again. Soon we were in a dense mangrove swamp. The water beneath us had turned foul and sulphurous. Insects rose from the surface in the swamps to settle in the mobile cloud above us, biting our arms and faces and ears. The boy and the old man appeared to be oblivious to the insects. They kept their eyes narrowed, focused on burying the boat through gnarled, hanging roots that grew out the water like proboscises gasping for the air. The atmosphere grew heavy with the suspended stench of dead matter. We followed a bend in the river, and in front of us we saw dead birds draped over tree lines, branches, their outstretched wings black and slick of oil. Dead fish bobbed white-bellied between tree roots. The next village was almost a replica of the last. The same empty, squat dwellings, the same ripe and flagrant stench, the barrenness, the oil slick, and the same unidentifiable sadness in the air, as if a community of ghosts were suspended above the punctured zinc roofs, unwilling to depart, yet powerless to return. In the village center, we found the communal well. Eager for a drink, I bent under the wet, mossy pivotal beam and peered into the well's blackness. But a rank smell wafted from its hot depths and slapped my face. I reeled away, my head aching from the encounter. Something organic, perhaps human, lay dead and decomposing down there. Its stench mixed with that unescapable smell of oil. At the other end of the village, a little river tricked toward the big river where we had left our boat. The patch of grass growing by the water was suffocated by a film of oil. Each blade covered the blotchiness like liver spots on the smoker's hands. We felt drained just standing there, and so we left. We pushed the boat into deeper water and scrambled in. By now, Zach seemed so lost, even the energy and the will to lift the bottle to his mouth. It lay neglected by his feet, and the piss-colored liquid in its sloshing back and forth with the movement of the boat. He sat and his hands spread wide on either side of his seat, holding on for dear life, and with each motion of the boat I waited for the vomit to come spewing out of his mouth, but somehow he kept it down. Do you want to stop at the next village? No, no more villages. I felt tired and listless, and I wondered when the old man would stop and dig in his heels and demand to go back, but he said nothing. He just kept going forward, deeper and deeper. In some places the river was so shallow and the swamp so thick we had to kill the mortar and push the boat through, ignoring the cold, dirty water that seeped into our shoes and shirts and trousers, and the foul smell that clung to our hair, and the itch on our grime-smeared faces. When we came once more to open water, the old man turned the head of the boat and picked up speed. I did not ask where he was going. I only hoped that it was close by and inhabited. I I get friend for next village. No good man. We go stop rest small. Maybe we fit sleep there tonight. Nah, good man. How far is it from here? Not too far, but it far small. We were as soundless as a ghost ship, the roar of our motor muffled by the saturated air over the black, expressionless water. There were no birds or fish or other water creatures. We were alone. When we arrived, a group of urchins welcomed us with shouts and curious stares. We left the boy in charge of the boat and headed for the rusted roofs that formed this tiny riverside village. After a few minutes, the boy got out of the boat and joined the other boys, who were now kicking an old patchy leather ball in the sand. The old man led us down an open street and cut the village in two. On either side were similar box-like houses looking down on the central street with something like a sneer. The houses seemed to belong more to the trees and the forest behind them than they did to a domestic human settlement. Women and children stared out at us inquisitively, but they quickly closed their doors and turned to some tasks when we waged or called out to them. Now we were in front of a cluster of open sheds and huts and stalls separated from one another by narrow passages. Inside the sheds and huts and sometimes out in the passages all sorts of consumer goods were displayed, from bath soaps and detergents to tins of sardines nestling next to the tins of milk and packs of biscuits. There were crates of Coca-Cola and Fanta on the shelves, and milk and packs of and Fanta on shelves and on the tables. There were second-hand clothes, radio batteries, plastic toys, and even roofing nails and broken packs. A loud-voiced woman with grimy aprons around their wide waists stood in the middle of the sheds, scooping gari from their iron basins and measuring bowls and pouring it into plastic bags held by customers. This part of the village was so different from the one when we just passed, and I wondered if we were still in the same village. The woman called out to us as we passed, pointing to her wares to tempt us. The last shed in the cluster was a blacksmith. "Nah, my friend, Caribe shall be this." The old man went inside. Four men stood in a semicircle in a corner of the shed, talking in low voices. In the center, squatting before a blazing hearth choked with metal, was a young man who looked at us briefly before returning to his chore. The men stopped talking, and one of them shook hands with the old man. The others nodded at him, then turned to look at us, their faces sullen. The old man talked for a while with the man while the others listened and interjected once in a while, their faces and gestures expressing deep perplexity. Then he rejoined us, looking troubled. "Is that your friend?" "Yes." "And so you must go. We no fit to stay." "But we just got here. Something wrong?" "Yes. Them here say soldier they come here today. Them they come find them." "Find them for what?" The old man shrugged and turned to look at the men in the shed. Them say he helped. Them say he did help demolitions. So why isn't he hiding? He say he the innocent, so he no gonna run anywhere. Caribe not important man for this village, very proud man. He stood there, unsure what to do. I looked at Zach. Clearly a newsworthy event was about to unfold. Rather than leaving, shouldn't I be getting my camera ready? Perhaps interviewing the man for some background? Before that thought could transform into action, things began to happen. There was a loud noise as of stamping feet. Dust rose and covered the tight passages in the stalls and the sheds. People rushed down their passages, knocking down tables and entire sheds as they went. Then a single gunshot rang out. For a moment, everyone froze. As I turned to ask the old man what was going on, a terrified market woman suddenly appeared in front of me, her eyes blinded by fear. The next minute, I was flat on my back, and her considerable mass was pinning me to the dusty ground. Then she was up on her feet and away, agile, almost airborne. Long afterward, I remember her marketplace smell and her unseeing eyes above mine, and the moaning, terrified silence coming continuously from her mouth, a sound she was unaware she was making. They were here. The soldiers are here. They came out of their sheds and houses and patches, wielding whips and guns, occasionally firing into the air to create more chaos. A man ran out the hut and came face to face with the soldier. He raised his hand high and surrender as, in a single moment, the soldier reversed his rifle and swung the butt to the man's head. The man fell back to the doorway. The soldier moved on to another target. I was saved from a broken jaw or cracked skull because I was still on the ground trying to regain my wind. Caribe and his friends, now joined his son, stood motionless shoulder to shoulder watching the pandemonium unfolding towards them. Like a wave that had started far away from the sea was now unstoppably headed to them, on the shore, gaining strength and fury as it came. Over 10 soldiers surrounded the smithy facing the silent, defiant men. One of the soldiers, a sergeant, stepped into the shed and pointed his rifle at Caribe. "You, come with us." His men rushed forward and grabbed Caribe, who didn't struggle or say a word. The other men watched, glaring at the soldiers but saying nothing. They pinned his hands behind him and dragged him away through the wide village street. In the distance, a woman wailed at the top of her voice, calling on God over and over, "Tamuno, Tamuno." That was chapter 1. Damn, that was kind of good. I'm not gonna lie to you, that was kind of good. These chapters on here, they seem long as hell, but these seem good. They seem kind of short, bro. Let's see. That took me 25 minutes to read. Oh my lord. I don't know how much this thing could keep going for, bro. I'll read another chapter, and then I guess I'll stop the footage and then start it up again. We left before the dust had finally settled. We went to the riverbank in the village with the villagers to watch the two speedboats that had brought the soldiers fly away over the water and out of sight. Karibi sat straight between two soldiers, his hands tied behind him, his face staring to the distant horizon. His son said he'd been taken to Port Harcourt, where he'd be tried and found guilty of fraternizing with the militias. But he was innocent. Isn't he innocent? My question to Zach, even I knew, was futile. How was he to know who was innocent and who wasn't? After all, hadn't we both just met the man for the first time today? But I couldn't get rid of the image of Karibi, stoic and defiant in the face of the threat from the soldiers. Surely only an innocent man would be so unruffled, so confident. Zach looked at me and shrugged. Guilty of what? And innocent of what? Some of the militias actually come from villages like this, so how can you stop these people from fraternizing with them? The old man decided to take us to his own village. It was a bit out of our way, he said, but it was the only place we could be sure of food and lodging for the night, and Zach definitely needed some sort of medical attention, or at least a long rest. Night had fallen. By the time we finally got there, it was an entire village on stilts, situated by the river on a vast mud flat, which at that moment was underwater, so the village appeared afloat. Narrow passages of water divided one row of huts from the next, like streets. The houses were made from weeping willow bamboos and raffia palms, and bits of zinc and plywood and cloth, and it seemed anything else but the builders were able to lay their hands on. The whole scarecrow settlement looked as if the next strong wind or wave would blow it away. Dugout canoes rested beneath the house floor, secured by the jute ropes to the stilts. They tugged at the restraint like horses. We floated silently between the houses, as figures in doorways and windows waved to us. Occasionally, we caught the sound of laughter over the silence, and sometimes the sound of a radio, its static strange and elemental in the desolate village. Finally, we came to a stop before one of the houses, which was larger than the others. A wooden ladder dangling over the water led us to the front door. Wait here, Small. I did come. The old man left us and climbed up the ladder to the door. The boy remained with us in the boat, wordless, looking tired and sleepy. We didn't wait long before the old man reappeared. With him was a big man who waved down to us and called out in a loud, friendly voice, "Come in! Come in! Come in!" We climbed the shaky ladder, placing each foot carefully, ready to grab at whatever was nearby to save ourselves if the rungs gave out from under us. I went first and then dragged Zach after me, his weight like a sack of sand. The living room was surprisingly spacious, made more so by the absence of furniture and one large open window. The floor was covered with old straw mats in which we sank as if they were cushions of the softest down. The big man sat in the only chair in the room, an armchair by the window facing the verandah and the river outside. "You are welcome to our village." The old man stood between us and the man in the chair, making introductions. "My brother, Chief Ibiram, they welcome you. Now him be the chief of this whole village. Now my brother for the same mother. These now my friends. Them be journalists. Not good people. That's why I bring them here." You are welcome to our village. Clearly, the chief wasn't a man of many words, but he appeared happy to be hosting us. I looked from the old man and his brother, trying to see resemblance. There wasn't any. Our guide was gray, whirly, and gnomish, whereas his brother was an impressive figure of a man, over 6 feet tall. Even seated, he dominated the whole room, making everything else appear on a smaller scale. The introductions were over, and the old man sat down beside his brother. A radio, turned to the station broadcasting in a language I could not identify, played softly on the side table next to Chief Ibidam. A door opened and a young girl came in with a lamp, which she set in the middle of the floor. It had grown totally dark outside. She was about 10, and she was bent down to place the lamp. She glanced at us furtively, and in a quick, shivering light, I saw her surprising, delicate features, her smooth, ebony skin, the white of her eyes, and the long black lashes, and then she was gone. Later she returned with food on a tray, boiled cassava and fish with palm oil and ground pepper. The chief came down here from his chair and we ate together on the floor. I was sure it was the best food I had ever eaten. I kept staring at the door, though which the girl had appeared and disappeared, hoping she'd return bearing more food. Zack did not eat. He sat away from us, his back propped up against the wall, and in the lamplight I could see the sweat on his forehead, but he did not complain. He sat, still and full of whiskey, his back against the flimsy straw wall, and soon he was snoring. Afterward, the old man joined the chief by the radio, and they sat silently, intently. All night long they listened. I'd wake up suddenly and see them seated in the same position, listening as if the message coming out of the tiny world receiver was a matter of life and death. They talked, perhaps commenting on what was coming from the radio in a mixture of Pidgin English and their language. I couldn't understand their words, but I imagined they were speaking of the dwindling stocks of fish in the river, the risking toxicity of the water, and how soon they might have to move to a place where the fishing was still fairly good. I listened in and out of sleep and dreamed of the little girl with burnished skin. This guy's kind of weird, bro. Why is he dreaming about a little girl? It's I look, you kind of get it though. Not like that, but like if you're surrounded by like people who are like, well, the water has oil on it. You know, there's no fish. Like everything's basically dead. Like it's a really like it's basically like dirty as hell because of all the pollution, bro. And then this one person comes in and they like have like they have have clean face. They have clean features and everything. You're like, what the hell? Like it just catches you off guard. I I kind of get it, but dreaming about a little girl, that's a bit too much, bro. That's a bit too much. It is dark. We are on the beach catching crabs to sell to the market woman in the morning. We have done this every night, she and I, but tonight the sea is harsh, frothy and spitting, and overhead the skies open up as if in symphony. We begin to run. Bulma is 5 years older than me, and so faster and sure on her feet. And now I slip, and it is to save me that she jumps into the waves and pushes me onto the beach to safety. I am alone on the beach in the miraculous, malevolent storm, and my sister is in the dark, dark water, arms flailing, and I only see the white of her rough, homespun dress rising and falling. Then she is gone, and I'm never ever going to see her again. And now I'm by the river, trying to run its tumultuous rise and fall to reach her and save her. I say I'm sorry for making her fall in the water. I leave the bucket of crabs overturned, and the crabs scatter all over the place, seeking their holes beneath the rising water. The waves vicious and implacable, and they have taken my sister away. And for some reason, she's not sad or angry. She's just calm, and she keeps repeating the same thing. You lucky, lucky boy. Always lucky from the day you were born. Nothing will ever harm you. Slow down. Say, say father, say father and mother. We can't understand a word you're saying. I keep repeating her name. Boma, Boma. She is gone. The waves have her. The whole village comes out with lamps, and the men go out in boats when the storm subsides. We find her the next day on an outcrop in the middle of the sea, and now all calm and demure and wouldn't drown a fly sea. She is beached on this square of dry land in the middle of the sea, and she is asleep or unconscious. Other men put her on the boat and take her home, and for the whole week she does nothing but sleep and spit out seawater. I woke up half asleep, and Zach standing over me. He looked rested, his eyes were clear, and there was a smile on his lips. "You are having a bad dream. Are we leaving? Where's the old man and the boy?" "They went fishing or catching crabs or whatever it is they do around here." He sat down in Chief Ibrahim's chair and fiddled with the radio controls, then looked at me and smiled. "Did you ever think that one day you'd visit a place like this when you became a reporter?" There was a jauntiness in his voice and a glitter to his smile, and he looked almost happy. Suddenly I recalled the first time I ever met him, almost 5 years ago, when he came to deliver the annual graduation lecture at the Ikija School of Journalism in Lagos. Having graduated at the top of my class, I had been chosen with two others to go to dinner with Zach afterward, and the others were Linda, the prettiest girl of my set, and Tolu, the brainiest. Tolu, like me, was a big fan of the great journalism, and I was sure somewhere in her bag was a recorder and a little notebook with a list of questions she wanted to ask him. Questions about life, about journalism, school, about things to expect in the newsroom, about the best papers to send applications to, and finally, whether he would mind being one of the references, or perhaps doing a letter of introduction to one of the editors. Besides being the brainiest student in my class, she was also the most aggressive, the most annoying, and at least pretty. With sickly yellow eyes that had a discoordinating way of looking at you without blinking. We were in the back of the room of a Chinese restaurant in Ikija. The girls were seated on both sides of Zach. Linda giggled as she poured more red wine into his glass, contriving to thrust her remarkable chest into his face as she did so. I was across the table, and on my left were two lecturers, Miss Ronco and Mr. Malik. Their hands, I started. Their hands, I could see clearly, were in each other's crotches under the table. And the night was just starting. A light in the red lampshade hung above the aisle to our left, throwing a funeral glow into our table. We were all desperately trying to engage Zach in conversation, but at the moment he seemed more focused on getting wasted. He had been there less than an hour, and while we waited for our order, he had finished a bottle of Shiraz by himself. A second bottle, which he had started with the food, stood half empty before him, his kung pao chicken beside the bottle of wine, still untouched. Tolu, all the time glaring at the flirty Linda, cleared her throat. "Don't you like the food, Mr. Zach?" Zach is my first name, actually. "Oh, so sorry, Mr. It's also my last name. I've only had one name since I became a journalist, and that was a long time ago." Tolu fell back. As the evening wore on her and her frustration mounted, I began to feel sorry for her. Zach raised his full glasses, waving as he leaned forward sideways towards Mrs. Ronka, turning his back on Tolu. "Here's a riddle. A madman escapes from an institution. He crosses a river and comes across the same washerwoman. He rapes them. Well, not all of them, if that mightn't really be possible." Miss Ronk winked at him, pushing aside a lick of her hair from her wig. "Surely that depended on how talented he was." Mrs. Ronk had worked with Zach on one of Lagos newspapers a long time ago. She had practiced journalism for more than 10 years before turning to lecturing, and she couldn't hold down her own with any man in anything, bawdy jokes included. Linda giggled and Tolu glared at her and cleared her throat. "Surely, Zach, sir, the subject of rape is a sensitive one. Most women wouldn't see the joke in. Zach nodded. "I agree with you, but remember, as a reporter, you'll come across worse things out there. Now, as I was saying, This well this well equipped and talented lunatic rapes all the washerwomen and runs away. Now here's a question. Say you were a journalist covering the rapes. Your story is written and you want a headline. And there's no sub editor to help you out on this one. The headline has to be witty, truthful, intriguing, compelling, and one with some literary appeal. What would it be? Tolu stabbed her food with her fork. Not looking up. I set my drink and I went first. Beware, dangerous lunatic on the loose. Zank inclined his head. Scary, not witty enough. Next, Ronka, give it a try. How about mad rapist coming your way? What the fuck? Malik raised his hand and surrendered, laughing. I'll pass. Zach, why don't you tell us? Belinda jumped in eagerly, putting his hand on Zach's arm, batting her eyes at him. Wait, me, I'll try. Dangerous escape lunatic and rapist on the loose. Beware. Too long, too repetitive. Where's the aesthetic? Where's the wit? By the way, Folu, this is a real story. It actually happened. Tolu. Right, Tolu. Wanna go? Tolu sipped her drink and refused to speak. Linda giggled and leaned heavily against Zach. She had only a single glass of wine and already her eyes were dim and her words were becoming indistinctive. Zach placed both elbows on the table and clutched his glass with one hand, his voice falling low like that of coach giving a pep talk. First of all, you couldn't get the answer because the perfect headline is never thought up. It's given to you. An inspiration, a revelation. You can make up a great headline by trying, but not a perfect one. The perfect one always comes to you after you've already published your story. Always too late. Now this guy was lucky. He came to him when he needed it. Come on, Zach, tell us. Loose nut, screws, washers, and bolts. How about that? Loose nut, screws, washers, and bolts. Okay. Now, sitting in Chief Ibrahim's front room, far away from Ikija and Chinese restaurants, I wondered where Tulu was. She had been voted most likely to be famous by her classmates, and one day I was sure I'd run on her TV and see her breaking some major news story. They'd come across her by line on the cover of Lagos newspaper over the most interesting story of the year. 5 years had passed, and in those 5 years I'd followed Zach's progress in the papers, but I hadn't seen him. Not until now, not until this assignment. I clearly saw images from that evening rise up before me as if popping out from the flooded and barren mud flaps outside. I saw the oversized plastic bracelet on Mrs. Ronke's veiny wrist, and the gaudy playing card patterns on Mr. Malik's tie. The hair from the mole on the pale cheek of the Chinese restaurateur as he bent over our table and whispered solicitously, You would like a food? More wine, yes? Halfway through the meal, Zank slumped forward and passed out, on his face, missing his plate by inches, but knocking down the empty wine glass. Mr. Malik and I lifted him under our arms, and while the girls got their things, we took him out and sat him on the bench by the roadside, hoping the air would revive him. But rather, the air-conditioned restaurant, the atmosphere outside felt heavy and humid, plastering a thin sheet of sweat on our skin. Mr. Malik took off his jacket and waved it back and forth over Zach's snoring face, his garish tie swinging from his neck with each movement. Now, how do we get him back to his hotel room? None of us had a car. A Malu bus stopped by the curb and the passengers got off in it like somnambulists, their steps leading, their heads bowed, their faces dull and expressionless. They bumped into one another as if they milled about confusedly for a while, and then they began to veer off singly into the dark side of streets and glow from the Akaro woman's fire, throwing their shadows up in front of them, long and blurred, ominous. Linda looked, throwing their shadows in front of them, long and broad, from an Akaro woman's fire, throwing their shadows in front of them, long and broad and ominous. Linda looked a bit sullen, perhaps unhappy at losing the chance to share the great Zach's bed. Tolu yawned and looked at her watch, holding her bag tightly to her flat chest, eager to leave. But for me, the night was about to begin, as I foolishly volunteered to take Zach back to his hotel room. He vomited all over the backseat of the taxi, and the angry driver threw us out after taking his money. We stood by the roadside and watched the taxi's red-black light screaming its anger at us. Then we walked for like what seemed hours through dark and narrow alleyways Jack saw him on my shoulder, his weight resting on my side, and it was all I could do was walk without falling. We staggered from one side of the nameless backstreets to another, often unable to avoid stepping into an open gutters that overflowing with the city's filth. We passed half-lit doorways where aging prostitutes called us out in hoarse voices that lacked all persuasiveness. We packed we passed a group of idle young men who stared long and hard at us, then followed us for about a block before finally deciding we weren't worth robbing. When I couldn't bear Zach's weight any longer, I let him slide like a sack on my shoulder. He sank to the ground in slow motion. He sat hunched over, his face buried in his knees, his back curved, and we remained like that for a long time, side by side on the curb. The night around us like a blanket, lifting only when an occasional bus full of passengers roared past. Then, when I brought when I thought Zach had fallen asleep, he spoke, his voice coming to me clear. Bar Beach. What? We're at Bar Beach, right behind us. You could smell the water. I stood up and turned, and there, behind the rudimentary fences running beside the road, was a white sand glow in the dark, and the dark water washing over the sand. For a while, the fresh sea air had been blowing right at us, but I had been too tired to notice. Once more, I put his arm around my shoulder, and we staggered to a noisy, crowded beach. I prayed the predatory youths at the improvised gate, and we went in. I spread Zack out in the sand where the water could not reach us and lay beside him. We immediately fell asleep. In the morning, he woke me and pointed eastward to a huge red sun emerging out of the blue water. Beautiful. Yes, beautiful. All around us were people sprawled out on the beach, drunk, slowly waking up to their hangovers, vagabonds and lunatics exhausted from their motionless prowling, lovers who couldn't afford a hotel room for the night. I was 20, the day before I graduated from school of journalism, and instead of heading, what happened? What? Ignore those. There you go. Damn it. I was lucky, kind of locked in. I think it was right here. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Heading off to home port half court, I had stayed and listened to Zach's lecture, seeking inspiration. The truth was that I had no plans, no job waiting for me. My ultimate ambition was of course to become like Zach someday, to be respected all over the country for my strong liberal views, and write editorials that would be read with awe. But hanging out with him previous night had brought no enlightenment as to how to realize my ambition. He gave me his number before we parted, and in that I had at least achieved more than Tolu. I thanked him and turned to go. What's your name? Rufus. Rufus. You have the patience to make a great reporter someday. I watched him head in front of the makeshift bars where a few early clients were trying the hair of the dog cure, or they were clients from previous night finishing up their last orders. He sat down and beckoned to the barman. To go time, I quickly updated my reporter's notebook, as I had done without fail every morning since that day we started on the white woman's trail. I sat along against the wall, and while Zach fiddled absently with the chief man razor, I wrote all that I had witnessed since we left Eureka, the abandoned villages, the hopeless landscape, the gas flares that always burn in the distance. I recreated with as much detail as I could their brutal taking of Caribe, and as I wrote, his son's words came back to me. He'll be taken to Port Halfcourt, where he'll be tried and found guilty of fraternizing with the militias. Zach fell asleep in the chair. I was hungry, and since I didn't look like anyone was coming soon off us, I decided to do some scouting. I got up and opened the door, through which the girl had appeared yesterday with the lamp and food. I found myself on a half-exposed walkway that connected the front room to other areas of the house, presumably the kitchen, the storage rooms. From here, I could see the other houses and could hear voices of children and women. The women were standing in an open shed around the hearth, probably smoking fish. The smoke from the hearth rose through the shed's hatch roof and dissipated to the dull, cloudy skies. I opened the first door on my right and said, I saw a group of children, about 5 of them, all about the same age, seated around an old woman. She was telling them a story. They looked up at me, and my shadow fell on the floor before them as I stood in the half open doorway trying to see in the dark room. I withdrew and went to another door, and this time I was in the right place. It was a kitchen, but apart from a few pots and pans resting on the smoke blackened table, it was empty. In a corner was a water pot with a plastic cup hanging from a string over it. I drank, but as I turned to go, the old woman entered and stood and just inside. As I turned, the old woman entered and stood just inside the doorway, but without blocking it. "Hello, I'm looking for the old man and the boy. We came together yesterday and food." She kept nodding as I spoke, a friendly smile on her lined face, and she was nodding, and she repeatedly said the same words. Yes, she probably couldn't understand me, and because I didn't speak the local language, I simply mimed eating, putting my right hand to my mouth. "Food, please." She laughed, nodding her understanding. Yes, yes. She brought me a bowl full of corn porridge. It was warm and sickly sweet and filling. She stood by the door and watched me eat, nodding and smiling all the time. Though the open door behind her came the voices of the children in the back. When I asked her when the men would be back, she said nothing but kept smiling and bowing and moving backwards until she was at the door. Afterward, I walked out into the mud flaps. I spent the next hour walking an ankle high flood in an ankle high flood. My trousers rolled up to my knees, taking pictures of the houses. Most of the houses were empty. The men out fishing and the woman smoking fish in the shed I'd seen earlier. I went to the shed last. The older woman stared into the camera lens. Silently, their tired, lined faces neither acknowledging nor forbidding my action. The younger woman giggled self-consciously, hastily wiping the ash and sweat from her faces with the edges of wrappers. The children ran forward and paused with hands on their waists, pushing each other out the way. While I was on my way back to Chief Ebrahim's front room, the men returned. I passed them hauling their canoes out of the shallow water and trying to get into the houseboats. Others carried the day's catch in plastic buckets and wicker baskets, and from what I could see, it wasn't bountiful. The boy and the girl took from one boat a basket with a handful of thin, wiggling fish at the bottom. The kids stopped on the veranda when they saw me, waiting for me to speak, standing side by side with the basket on the floor between them, and behind them the sun was huge and dying, spilling orange and red and rust on the shallow river and the mangroves. "Smile," they smiled back. I clicked. I wanted to talk to him, but I couldn't think of anything to say. I had known the boy for a couple of days now, and that time I had never heard him say much, only answers to his father's questions or commands. And mostly they never talked at all. Each seemed to have an instinctive understanding of what the other wanted. When I was a boy, me and my sister, we used to catch crabs. We looked at each other. No crabs here now. The water's not good. The girl, whose name was Alali, was more willing to talk. The boy only nodded with his head lowered, a fake smile on his lips. I wanted to tell them about my childhood in a village not too far from here. I realized how very much like theirs my childhood must have been. Barefooted, underfed we may have been, but the sea was just outside our door, constantly bringing surprises, suggesting a certain possibility to our lives. Bowman and I used to spend the whole night by the water catching crabs, armed with sticks and basket, our hands covered in old rags to protect our fingers from the scissor-sharp claws. We usually sold our catch to the market woman, but sometimes, to make more money, we took the ferry to Port Harcourt to sell the restaurants by the waterfront, which is how we paid our school fees when our father lost his job. Jack was trying hard to hide his annoyance, and he wasn't succeeding. "You should have told us you were going to be out all day. We wasted a whole day now. I thought your job was to be our guide. We hired you." We were in the Vernada. Chief Ibrahim was inside somewhere, taking a bath. Technically, he hadn't hired the old man. He had simply appeared out of the night and became our guide, he and his son. But I understood Zach's anger, because I felt it too. But mine wasn't directed at the old man. Rather, it came from a feeling of frustration and general irritability at the way things had been going since we started on the trail of the kidnapped woman. The events were always a step ahead of us, as if Eshu and Trickster God were out to play with us. Zach's anger was intense fired by a strange fever and the continuous ache from his swelling legs. The booze had helped to dull the pain, but now the booze was finished and the pain kept him constantly on edge. The old man looked close to tears. He glanced toward me helplessly, waving his hands. You know well, sir, that's why. I say you go stop here, rest small before we go, that's why. But Zach's anger disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. He lowered his voice and turned into the house. We must set out early tomorrow, first thing in the morning. Yes, sir, yes. Yes, sir, early morning tomorrow. That night, I listened to Zach churning and moaning and cursing on the mat beside me all night long, battling his pain and his demons. Oh, damn. How long was that, bro? Close to an hour. Oh, been doing this for almost an hour, bro. And what am I? Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 hours of book reading. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, and I'll be back in like a minute. I'm gonna take a break.